Hey guys, welcome to another agency update. This time I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I was wondering what to do today. I got a few things on my list, but I just got done doing an SEO audit for a client, and I thought this would be a really good thing to showcase. So I'm going to show you pretty much our standard templated SEO audit. And I usually do a Loom video recording like this and send it to the client. So it's really, really useful. You get feedback when the client opens the video as well, so you know when they've seen your report, which is really good feedback to know. So I recommend using Loom video for that alone. This was a white labeled audit, which is why it doesn't have any of our branding on. That we do quite a bit of agency white label service. And we use a template. We use the Semrush API, and we use Screamingfrog data that mashes it all up into a report, and then we pull from that report into this presentation file. So there's quite a lot of stuff behind the scenes that happens to get to this report here, but it's actually quite an efficient process. So we pull all of the data in, happens semi-automatically. There's still quite a bit of manual screenshotting and manipulating of things. And then we do an analysis of it, make a commentary on it, make some recommendations, and usually we'll discuss with the client what we find and what we want to do about it. So let's jump in. So we start out executive summary, and I've gone back and forth on how to do these. Different people want to receive different kinds of information. The executive summary is just a really high level, hey, here we conducted an SEO audit. And then we write specific commentary on what we found. So this is a very distilled version of the report. So it says in this case, and I'll talk a little bit more of you about some of the issues we found and the way that we produce this report. So this won't be too much like my normal video to a client, but I'll just discuss things through this report as I think will be useful for you. So we noted that the site performs really well on the desktop environment, but much less so on a mobile platform. And this niche, this is for like a major wireless network supplier, networking equipment supplier. The majority of their users are desktop, but Google's mobile first index, and it's important to optimize for the mobile platform too. So on-page SEO criteria is where most improvements are needed on this site. Most attention should be paid. There is an index bloat issue, which has been identified, and the long-term traffic trend has been increasing, although recently there's been a slight decline. And in this report, we make some recommendations and cover all of the pertinent SEO items. So the recommendations that we made here from this report were add descriptive page titles to pages with duplicate and short titles. Add descriptive headings, and as you all know, Google made some pretty big changes recently on how they display this in the search results. And this site has a particular issue with that, and it's perhaps why they've lost a little bit of traffic recently, and I expect that their click-through rate is significantly down. Now, we don't actually have Google Analytics and Google Search Console data for this site. It would be really nice if we did. It's something that we struggle with a little bit with agency clients, is getting that access early on when we do the initial report. We get it later after we make some of these recommendations. But for these reports were designed with the intent of having Google Search Console and Google Analytics data. We get more information from it. We produce a better report with it. So there's some stuff that's sort of chopped out of this report for that reason, and for that reason only. Add page level meta robots declarations, index and follow. So on this site, it uses robots.txt, but it doesn't use the meta robots protocol. Now, robots.txt is decrypted protocol now. It's a hint rather than a directive. Those two distinctions that Google makes, hint or directive. The meta robots or X header response is the recommended standard, which is a directive and not a hint. So we recommend that to be done. There's actually a quirky broken comment in the robots.txt file. I tested it a few different ways. It doesn't look like it causes any problems. It does look like it won't actually do the declaration that they intend to do. This is a sweet commerce site, which is a funky platform. It's kind of clunky. and what they're trying to do is not allow the native URL structure to be indexed. And I thought, well, there's my index bloat issue. Turned out that wasn't the case though. They also have a little bit of a goofy priority setting in XML sitemaps, and I'm sure this one will be debated. I don't think that this is hugely important, but it's just one of those best practices. So, nature of the game of SEO is chipping away at every little thing that slightly matters and in a prioritized manner. So that's just a recommendation there. So we do need to investigate the index bloat issue and index indiscrepancy. We found almost 10 times more pages from a Google site search than there are navigatable on the site through a couple of different technical crawls. So that needs investigation. No conclusion on that yet from this report. What we do see with this site is a really, really broad navigation structure. So we recommend restructuring that a little bit. And then for the mobile and in fact the desktop performance, the cumulative layout shift fails the core web vitals, and it's actually for a really simple reason, which I'll talk more about later. So we just show, and this is straight from Semrush. This is just a screenshot straight from Semrush. I don't know why I haven't built this into our API yet. It would be way easier. So over a long time, we've been generally increasing traffic a little bit, not really strong growth, and then recently taken a bit of a dip as well. So some of these updates may have been impactful. We always look to see whether there's a correlating Google update to a traffic loss and try and understand that. So take a little look at the indexation state. And as I said, Google has 15,300 pages indexed according to site:/domain. Now, I know and accept that that's not necessarily a representation of what's in the index. It's indicative. It's long since been fully accurate, and we're aware of that. We just use it as an indication. And when we see a big discrepancy between the number of URLs and what's in that site:/command, that starts to be suggestive of an indexing issue. So needs more investigation on that. We use a tool called Shodan.io, and we do an NS lookup to find the IP address the site's hosted at, and then we look at that IP address in Shodan. It shows you where it's geographically located. Shodan is a really useful tool. It's more of a cybersecurity tool. Helps you find any open vulnerabilities. You can see the tech stack, what they're running, what ports are open, what bunch of different things. This server is correctly configured, just has port 80 and 443, and port 80 correctly 301 redirects to port 443 for HTTPS traffic. This did actually report a certificate error, but we checked that a number of different ways and we didn't find an issue with the certificate. So don't know what that's about, but we don't consider that an issue. Then we look at the robots.txt file, and this is saying user agent, all user agents disallow this structure, which is the Suite Commerce sort of native URL structure. So wildcard anything following this, but they miss this pound symbol. That basically says disallow this whole line, which isn't really a valid statement. And I tested it out a number of different ways. It doesn't seem to be problematic. It doesn't look like it doesn't look like it disallows any URLs of that format. So I thought, that's where the index bloat issue is coming from. But it turns out not the case. I didn't find any of those URLs in Google. So I do need to do the Google Search Console analysis to understand that better. But yeah, just a little goofy thing, very, very minor finding. This still works generally fine. It was just an observation. So we mentioned, and I want to give a shout out as well to the SEO Pro Extension from Christina. It's an awesome tool. I use it more and more every day. And we just throw a screenshot of it, a snapshot of it into a lot of reports. It's just really quick access right in the browser, drop the toolbar down, very good, useful information. So we see on nearly all of their pages, they're not specifying meta robots. And, we like to be fully descriptive, especially when it's a directive. Be explicit. It doesn't hurt to tell Google what you want it to do. Don't leave it to chance. So that's something that we're pretty strong on. Next, we look at status codes. And so this actually comes from the Screamingfrog audit into our SEO audit template sheet. And then that's linked to, that's linked to this presentation. So there's lots of these things. So we run the Screaming Frog audit, send the audit report to Google Drive automatically, and then that gets integrated into the SEO Audit Report template automatically, and that gets linked to this presentation. So a lot of these things just happen from the initial audit, which is really efficient. I think I'll try and talk more about that in another agency update later. So here we're looking at the sitemap. So XML file does not appear to have any style information. That's totally fine, not a problem. What we do see here is that the home page is given a priority of 1 and all of the other pages are 0.5. That was kind of an old school practice. We don't really recommend to do that. We just say either omit it or set them a little more appropriately. Don't really expect this will have any significant impact. It's just an observation. Then we look at canonical URLs. So they do have a lot of canonicals and they're self-referencing. A lot of people get hung up about that. I don't think that's a big problem if they're self-referencing. There are quite a lot of missing canonicals, and I thought, well, maybe that's a potential reason for index bloat, but also no. So here we're just showing a list of URLs from the Screaming Frog audit, and that not many of them contain the canonical declaration, which is something that needs to be addressed. Next, you'll all be very familiar with this. This is the Semrush audit overview page, where it lists the items. So we just say, here's what we found, and we'll talk about that next. This is the crawl visualization from Screaming Frog. I love this tool, and I wish I could show you it live, but I don't want to expose the client URL, so I can't do that. But what we see here, so this is a view of the whole site, the tree cluster, how coming in the root domain, and how the search engine spider will crawl through that. It's very, very broad architecture. Very broad. There's so many branches just direct off the home page. And what I show here is a section that shows this more clustered, which is more appropriate. I'd like to see more of the site like this way, not all of these URLs be top level. I'll talk a lot more about that in this report. But we just get a look at the site and get a feel for it, understand the structure, and make any recommendations based on that. So here, and I can't show you a lot of this stuff is grayed out because I can't expose the client URL. But navigation is very broad, top level. It gives a lot of opportunities immediately, but it really dilutes link equity at each URL. So we like to see a more structured, clustered 3-tier navigation approach. Breadcrumb navigation is used here, which does actually go quite a long way to dealing with that navigation structure. So using breadcrumbs and using breadcrumb schema markup, does go a long way to helping search engines understand the categories and hierarchy of these pages, but we still recommend a different navigation structure. So crawl depth, very much symptomatic of the site architecture. Again, we show the URLs, and we just make comments on the URLs if they're descriptive, if they're too long, do they have keywords in them, and we note here, you see a lot of SEO gurus saying, I'll rewrite your URLs to have keyword friendly and pretty URLs, and see people go ahead and take that advice and change it blindly without realizing they've just completely wiped out all of their index pages. I've had clients do this to me because they watched a video from prominent SEO guru, who I'm sure many of you can guess. So there's almost never a good reason to change an already indexed URL. There are occasions where it makes sense, and we will do that if necessary, but nearly always not. We just make some comments here on the URL format, the structure, how it looks. Next, we talk about breadcrumbs and structured data. So this site is using them, which is good. The home page actually has very, very little entity or organization schema markup, and there's lots you can add, which is important. And I made a comment here. I'm sure some people will disagree with me on this, but that's fine. So EAT as a concept is generally the trajectory that search is going. It's not a criteria in this niche yet, I don't think. More just a comment that those things can help with that. there is no hard and fast EAT metric for sure, and Google doesn't have a specific EAT ranking factor. But the algorithm is trained on machine learning based on feedback from real testers that look at the quality raters guidelines that heavily talks about EAT. So indirectly, that's the trend and trajectory of search. So a lot of people get really hung up on it, and a lot of people get hung up on indirect or direct ranking factors. My argument to that is, if it moves the needle, it moves the needle. Anyway, enough on EAT. Love to hear what you think about that though in the comments. So on-page SEO is the biggest area that could be improved with this site. And the main issues here are just short and duplicate titles. And as we know, Google recently changed the handling of titles fairly significantly, where it usually about 75% of the time will default to the H1 heading, which this site doesn't have in many cases. You can end up with a really ugly URL slug or even alt text or anything. And this is probably impacting the click-through rate for this site, and that's probably being net negative for them. So again, this stuff here, this comes from our SEO audit template, which comes from the Screamingfrog audit. So it's somewhat automatically populated and ends up in this report pretty automatically. I got some improvements to make in this process, but this works pretty nice. I'm quite happy with this. So meta descriptions, majority of them are missing on this site. So Google will rewrite the meta descriptions again, roughly 75% of the time, but it's still considered best practice to give that compelling description. It helps with click-through rate, and that has a net positive benefit. And I know probably get some flack for this as well, but RankBrain, right? RankBrain looks at the performance and clicks back and forth in search and adjusts and manipulates search results based on that. So does click-through rate have an effect on search? Many people say no. Many people say yes. I'm much more on the side of yes. I've tested this. Actually, back in even 2006, I think I tested, saw some influence. And then there's a bunch of studies on click bots and click manipulation that can show positive results and even negative results. But does it influence it? Yes, it does. I've tested that. But feel free. Tell me below why it doesn't. If you don't agree it does, we can talk about it. Testing is hugely important in SEO. And things change so frequently as well. And just because Google says they don't do something doesn't mean that they don't. And we have this comment about meta keywords. So Google doesn't use meta keywords. We don't strongly recommend to use them or not to use them. Bing does. So, it doesn't hurt to have meta keywords in there. What we do say is if you're going to have meta keywords, make sure that those keywords are in the body text, because it can potentially, and very, very low likelihood, but it can lead to a penalty. Very, very minor chance of that happening. And I don't think that happens recently, but we just advise to make sure that if you're using meta keywords, they do exist in the body content. So onto titles. Here we see there's lots and lots of duplicate titles, and then lots and lots of short titles. So you can see here the majority of them are just shopping, which is really poor. And some of these you can't see here because I've blocked it out, but some of the URLs are like very descriptive specific products. They should have a compelling descriptive title, and they don't. And then couple that with missing header tags, and then that becomes actually a real problem with the changes Google's made recently. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of on-page SEO with this site. Content, this is one of the lighter areas of this report. We don't really do a very thorough content analysis for these types of audits, and we do deeper audits where we do that, and full content audits where we look much deeper at content. But this was a very, very product-centric e-commerce site. It's not expected for it to have that much content. And there are some additional useful resources on this site, so it's not devoid of any useful content. And we just comment that building out content topics focused around key products and phrases would be beneficial, but it's not something that's typically expected for this type of site. And we look at referring domains, and we see, so referring domains is one of the biggest drivers, and we see them actually declining, increasing and then declining very recently. One thing I'd really love for Semrush to fix is that why are these not the same timescale? And these don't seem to make sense with what this graph shows. This is something that I really hope we can fix soon. In any event, we see referring domains have actually been slightly decreasing, yet the authority score has actually gone up recently. And that's just probably because we've lost some lower quality domains but gained some higher ones. So the net authority score is higher. The overall toxicity score is high. So this is something that's quite subjective and debatable, risky whether you do a disavow or not. We are on the side of disavow light. And I agree with the toxicity score about 50% of the time. And we always do a manual review of the backlinks before we would even consider doing a disavow. When there are really obvious patterns, like there's a clear cluster of sites from the same IP or the same locations, or there's 25% of the links come from one country that you wouldn't expect to be linking, all with the same structure, title, AdSense, ad analytics, tracking code, and all that. That sticks out like a sore thumb. So those get chopped easily. But we do what I would say a disavow light, and we don't do it commonly. It's only if we really think that there's a problem related to that. So like I say, I agree with this about 50% of the time. Next, we look at and this comes from straight from Semrush again. Actually do have this separately built into a newer version of our audit template, but we haven't released that yet. So this looks at the authority score. And this is subjective. It's meant to be analogous to Google's PageRank algorithm. And we see that it's skewed pretty low quality domains in general, or low authority score. It doesn't necessarily mean low quality, but generally it does. Majority of links are text, which is good. Majority of follow, not no follow. No follow again has been a little subjective. So Google recently, I think 2021 it was, maybe it was late 2020, announced that they're changing the treatment of no follow. No follow used to just mean I don't vouch for this content and had absolutely zero value in terms of SEO. Now they say that they will trust some authoritative sites and will consider a no follow link to be essentially a follow link, which is really interesting. Now we have data back to 2016, which actually shows positive influence from no follow links. So they've been doing this a lot longer than they announced. Again, testing. You always got to keep testing stuff and seeing stuff. And I actually had one site where they had 18,000 links that were all no follow from one domain. It was actually a decent domain, and that domain got shut down and the client site went whoosh. So those no follow links were definitely having a positive effect, even though common SEO knowledge and what Google says would have said it should have had no effect. It did. And we, like I say, we had data showing that back to 2016. This is the internal linking structure from the Semrush. And this, I always get confused where this should be. It feels like it should be in a link section, but it's in the audit report and it's under internal linking. What we're commenting here is because of the navigation structure of this site, this is kind of backwards. This is skewed backwards to how we'd want to only have a few very strong pages that have the majority of links to them, and this could trend the other way and following that clustered and tiered hierarchy. It's largely a symptom of the navigation. What we show here is the anchor text cloud, but I can't show you that because it's a heavily branded anchor text cloud and it would give away who the client is. So majority of their links, so category relevance, a lot of people omit from a backlink analysis. And in fact, in some analyses, we drill down specifically on these categories. And when we're doing competitive analysis too, we do that on competitor sites and look at what are the links that are really moving the needle. Just had one recently where we need to get 3,000 referring domains to compete with the competitors. And we basically distilled that down to 100 high quality link targets, which we're going after. So those will move the needle way more than the 2,900 other links. So again, Semrush is really useful for doing that kind of drill down and analysis. One of the reasons that we like it. And the majority of links to this site are in appropriate categories, which is really good. We only found one broken external link, which for a site like this is really good. We'll still fix it though. So Pagespeed, it is considered to be important for organic search results. And again, this is probably another debatable item. I want to hear from you on this, so let me know. Core Web Vitals. So I expected this to be more impactful than it was. We did a lot of planning and preparedness for when the Page Experience and Core Web Vitals came out. What we have now seen that there is some effect from the Core Web Vitals. So good Core Web Vitals does help. It's a small ranking factor, but again, nature of SEO is every little thing, chipping away at every little thing you can do to move the needle. And so this site fails on cumulative layout shift. There's actually some really low-hanging fruit to resolve this. So, and I just used this today. The new, I don't know how new this is, but I look at this nearly daily, and this was new to me today. The Google Pagespeed Insights report. So go check that out. So we're on the desktop, we're passing all of the metrics except cumulative layout shift, which is failing badly. And on the mobile device, we are almost passing most of the metrics except failing cumulative layout shift badly. So then we look at why is that? And I'm filtering here just to things that matter for cumulative layout shift. And you see as the frames load, render, nothing. And then it jumps all over the place in the next few frames. And the main reason for this is just they don't specify the image height and width. So the images have to fully load and nudge everything else around before this full paint can happen. It's actually a really easy thing to resolve here, which is great. And combine this with a well set up CDN, and then you're really delivering the optimized pages to the user. So that would be good. And then we look at the load sequence in Chrome Inspector, which is another great tool from Google. And this is the desktop load sequence, and it loads really good. And some of these green section here is time to first byte, which look kind of long, but they're actually not, because this site loads in just over 1.2 seconds. And apart from the fact that it jumps all over the place when it does that, it actually loads really well. So there's nothing significant here. There's a bunch of further drill down that we could do, but this is just a look and see basically. So that concludes the report. I'd really love your feedback. So thanks for sticking with me if you got to the end here. I would really love your feedback on this audit. Tools we use to Semrush and Screamingfrog, we use in APIs, and we use in sharing through Google and doing a lot of automation here. Love to know what you think about the audit and any of the things we touched on here. Let me know, and I would love to talk to you about it. Thanks.